Federal immigration authorities arrested a second person who participated in pro-Palestine protests at Columbia University and have revoked the visa of another student, they announced Friday. Lika Cordia, a Palestinian from the West Bank, was arrested by immigration officers for overstaying her student visa. The Department of Homeland Security said Cordia's visa was terminated in January of 2022 for, quote, lack of attendance. The department said she was previously arrested for her involvement in protests at Columbia in April of 2024, the agency added. The Trump administration also revoked the visa of Ranjani Srinivasan, an Indian citizen and doctoral student at Columbia University, for allegedly advocating for violence and terrorism. He opted to self-deport Tuesday, 5 days after. She opted to self-deport Tuesday, 5 days after her visa was revoked, the department said. You mentioned this has had a chilling effect on campus.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there are fewer people turning out to protest? Do you feel like there are, this is dying down in any kind of way? Do you feel like there has been a difference between the character of the protest before and after Trump's election, as so many liberals have claimed to be the case? What does it look like on your end?
I would still say, so people are still showing up to protests, but I would say a lot of like the international students are scared to show up to protests. And when people show up to protests, they show up in a mask, they show up in a keffiyeh, they try not to show up in ways that could identify them. And that has been used against protesters. They're wearing masks, they're wearing keffiyehs, they don't want to be identified. And it's like, that's Islamophobic, like saying, like making a big deal that people want to cover their hair. If somebody wants to cover their hair, that's their business. And also, like, can you blame people for like wanting to hide their identity when there are such violent consequences in place? Also, I would say a lot of this, like people really, really support Palestine on campus. People really, really care about Palestine. And that's why they're cracking down so hard. And I would say a lot of these actions from Zionists, truthfully, they've backfired because it showed their true character. If you were quote unquote unsafe on campus, why are you following someone around with a camera and saying death threats to them? That's something that's happened to students. They will openly threaten you and follow you around with a camera, but if you say anything back, somehow you are the terrorist, you are the violent person. And it's really, I think when it comes to Columbia, when it comes to these other schools, I think that when it comes to support for Palestine, we're going to see the effects of this like 10, 15, 20 years from now. That's why they're so focused on Columbia, because Columbia, like it or not, that's where the future policymakers are going to school. That's where the future leaders are going to school. And Zionists think that if they just crack down hard enough, that will get people to stop supporting Palestine. But I would say, if anything, it's done the exact opposite, because people who traditionally wouldn't be interested in Palestine or concerned with Palestine, they are seeing their friends, they are seeing their family members, they are seeing their classmates brutalized and treated horribly for standing up for what they believe in. And the other thing too is that like Columbia has a history of protests. It markets itself as the protest ivy. They make a really big deal about the 1968 protests where students occupied multiple buildings. None of those students were expelled, yet multiple students were expelled for the occupation of Hamilton Hall, renamed as Hins Hall. One of those students was Jewish. They expelled a Jewish student, the leader of the graduate student union, a Jewish student studying Jewish literature, to get rid of anti-Semitism on campus. And it's like, how does expelling a Jewish student get rid of anti-Semitism? It's disingenuous, and they know it. They know it's disingenuous, but they can't win the argument on substance or rhetoric. So what they're doing instead is engaging in a brutal, brutal crackdown and hoping that that will stop the movement. But what happens is that repression backfires. It always, always does. And I know that even though this is really hard right now, I know that Colombia is going to divest. I know that we're going to see a free Palestine. I know it because we have so many people who really care about Palestine, who really care about making the world a better place. And I will say that I have been blessed to meet so many wonderful people, people that I wouldn't meet otherwise, because I've attended a protest, because I've gotten to engage with other Palestinian students on campus. And I feel like in a few years from now, even though like people are villainizing us right now and demonizing us, I feel like in a few years, Columbia's going to look back and be like, man, what were we doing? What were we thinking?
I hope you're right. I mean, last year we did an episode with Dr. Mark Nason, who was a student back at the protests in the 60s and the occupation of then Hamilton Hall, which
Hmm.
was an armed occupation and
Yeah.
was so much more militant, frankly, than what is going on now. And he was like, yeah, there was zero consequence. Like there were zero consequences for that. Like no, not even like a rap on the wrist for doing that. And he was contrasting it with what his students now, I believe, is a professor at Fordham,
Hmm.
were experiencing in the midst of the protest. They had his students had just occupied Fordham and like put flyers on the windows, and maybe they locked the door from the inside, and people were getting really harsh retribution from the university as a consequence of that. I really encourage people to go back and listen to that episode. It was episode 369. It looks like maybe that was premium, so maybe we'll go ahead and unlock that for you guys since it's so germane to the moment. Um, but it seems like we're moving backward.
Yeah.
It seems like there's obviously been a retrenchment from the university's approach in the 1960s to now. And while I'm hopeful that you're right, there are some indicia that we still got farther to go down this fascistic pathway. I want to talk about this new letter from Donald Trump to Colombia, in which he lists his demands for a continued financial relationship between Colombia and the United States government. In other words, a kind of a funding hostage letter. You mentioned that these sort of diversity programs that are ostensibly there for the purpose of protecting students are being weaponized on behalf of pro-Zionist students, and that there's no institutional support. Well, look at one of Donald Trump's demands. It is to, quote, begin the process of placing the Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies Department under academic receivership for a minimum of 5 years. The university must provide a full plan with date certain deliverables by March 2025. So in other words, constraining, limiting, shrinking, potentially deprioritizing entire departments that have a focus on the part of the world and ostensibly an ideological perspective that is unfavorable to the president of the United States. This is unconstitutionally illegal, by the way, but this is where we are. And that's just one of, a dozen bullet points on this letter. Can you speak to what's the reaction has been to this sort of strong arming and this kind of threatening posture against the university?
Yeah. So I would say wanting to shut down the Mesa's department, that's not a new demand from Zionists. Zionists have been demanding that for years. And Colombia is really well known for their scholars on the Middle East. On the Middle East, we're I would say Columbia is I think it's the only university in the country with a Center for Palestine Studies. So people come here specifically to study Palestine, and a lot of Zionists, they view that as a threat. They view Palestinian professors as a threat because they can't control the narrative. They can't control what's going on, and they don't like that. Um, and also too is I think it shows desperation that they're trying to put an entire department under what did they call it, receivership. Like we didn't
Yeah.
even see that during like the Iraq war, for example, the so-called like war on terror. That wasn't something that was really proposed to universities to like shut down an entire department. And I think Columbia is really going to have to make a decision. Are they going to stay true to their academic mission, which is to educate people, even if something is deemed quote unquote controversial, even if something is deemed upsetting, the entire point of getting a university education is to expose you to new perspectives and new ways of thinking. I've learned stuff in my program that's like made me uncomfortable, or I've been like, oh, that makes me feel bad. But I don't think an entire program should be abolished because of my personal discomfort. And the dismantling of higher ed is this is something that conservatives have really lobbied for a long time. And we saw this with the outrage over critical race theory, for example, conservatives
Hmm.
using that as an excuse to shut down departments and get rid of programs. Really, I think it's important for academics to realize a lot of academics, they do not see themselves as activists. They don't want to organize, they don't want to do stuff. They're like, I'm here just to study. And I get that. Like, I didn't sign up for this stuff. I didn't imagine myself doing this, but it's like they are trying to take away the very function of your job. I mean, who knows that like some universities they're trying to get rid of tenure, which is a huge, I think they
Right.
did that at University of Illinois, correct me if I'm wrong. And they're trying to dismantle the university as we know it. And it's like this is not the time to be business as usual to play it safe. This is the time to organize with other faculty members. This is the time to make your voice heard because they're trying to get rid of your job. They've said it very openly, and it's been kind of fresh. It's been a little frustrating. Like there's been some faculty and stuff that have been like very supportive, but there are some faculty at I would say schools across the country. They don't really realize how much is at stake. They think if they just keep their head down and just keep doing the work, that things will fix themselves. And unfortunately, with fascism, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I mean, look at some of these other data points. As we're sitting here talking, you masked one of the bullet points of Trump's demands to Colombia is to ban masks.
Hmm.
Quote, ban masks that are intended to conceal identity or intimidate others, as though the mask isn't intended to protect yourself from the intimidation that you're facing. They say that there's exceptions for religious and health reasons, but how are they going to police that exactly? And to your point about this being a broader attack on universities, there's a point here about a plan for comprehensive admissions reform,
Hmm.
meaning who are you bringing into the university? Are you going to consider diversity? And to be clear, geographic diversity, making sure that there's a kid from Utah and a kid from Hawaii and a kid from Iowa is never what they're talking about. Those kinds of diversity is accepted as being a good thing that enriches the quality of the school. What they want to make sure is that there's never any race considerations that are happening in the course of admissions. And of course, there's also a bullet point that asks for restrictions on the ability to protest.
Hmm.
Quote, time, place, and manner rules on to prevent the quote disruption of teaching, research, and campus life. These demands aren't going to get shorter. The demand list is not going to get shorter over time. And it really is unconscionable that the students have had to bear the brunt of pushing back against this kind of political overreach while so many professors have stood on the sideline. I mean, I can't even imagine what the climate is like in classes, specifically classes that relate to Middle East studies,
Hmm.
if the professor is basically exempting themselves from participation and allowing the students before them to really suffer the slings and arrows of this, to be threatened with, what was this most recently? The prospect of degree revocations.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. They like people have paid for their degrees, paid tuition, they graduated, and Columbia has revoked their degrees. I'm like, if you're going to revoke people's degrees, you need to give people a refund for tuition. Like that's just not fair.
Absolutely.
I've never heard of a university doing that.
It's outrageous. And I can't imagine that any number of lawsuits are going to result as a consequence of this. I want to just say if Harvard University would like to revoke either or both of my degrees, I stand ready to receive the $500,000 I spent on tuition over the course of the years. I'm open to that bargain. But of course, I'm making a joke and I'm saying that as someone who's already established in their career. This is
Hmm.
devastating,
Hmm.
devastating for students.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's primarily a lot of the people in that are participating in these protests, a lot of students are low income, a lot of students don't have financial support from their family members. So it's like the degree is like the one thing that they have, and then to revoke that from people is it's devastating. And it's also too is like degree revocations is like they are typically done for something. I've heard of them when it comes to like say plagiarism or something like extreme, but to do this for protest is unheard of. And the concerning thing with Columbia is that what starts at Columbia doesn't just stay at Columbia. Other schools are going to look at Columbia as a model and be like, oh, if they did this at Columbia, I can do this to my students. And I think that's just completely unacceptable. If you completed the course requirements, if you paid tuition, whether you're on a scholarship, whether you're loans, whether you paid outright, you deserve to have your degree. And they're trying to say, oh, it's just temporary, like it's just not that bad. Temporary is incredibly vague. Like with Columbia, that could be 6 months, it could be 5 years. And it's not like the school is like providing resources to students who've been doxxed and harassed, like, like helping them get a job or anything. Like I graduate in this May and like I'm worried about getting a job, as are many other students who've been doxxed and been harassed because like when you Google us, when you look us up, there are all these ridiculous claims like claiming that we're part of Hamas or I mean they tried claiming that the pigeons I feed, so I like to feed pigeons on campus, right? They tried claiming that the
Hmm.
pigeons I feed are part of Hamas. I was like, this is crazy. And but when you
What?
Google me, that's yes, yes. They called the pigeons the winged resistance. I was like, this is crazy.
Stop.
Why would yes. I was like, why would a pigeon be part of Hamas? Like
He must have shied on the wrong pro-Zionist student or professor. Oh my God.
like but
Oh my God.
but that's what happens when you Google me on when you Google me online. It's like, I'm applying for jobs and stuff, but it's like I'm worried like an employer is going to see that and be like, oh, we don't want to hire her. She's like too much of a risk. And that's like not a concern. That's a concern shared by me, but also like shared by other students as well.
Yeah, I want to give you a chance to respond. There's been a number of statements specifically issued in response to Mahmoud Khalil's detention. Because he is a green card holder and legal resident, married to
Mhm.
a very pregnant, 8-month pregnant American woman, even the most staunch Zionists have been forced to sort of make a statement. I'm thinking of people like Chuck Schumer, but they have gone as far as is humanly possible to sort of smear and diminish Mahmoud in the course of making these statements. So, for example, Chuck Schumer's statement opens, I abhor many of the opinions and policies that Mahmoud Khalil holds in support and supports, and I have made my criticism of the anti-Semitic actions at Columbia loudly known. Mr. Khalil is also a legal permanent resident here, and his wife, who is 8 months pregnant, is an American citizen. While he may be in violation of various campus rules regarding how the protests were conducted last year, that is a matter for the university to pursue, and I have encouraged them to be much more robust in how they combat anti-Semitism and maintain a harassment-free campus that protects the safety and security of Jewish and other students. Can you respond to this characterization of Mahmoud and what you know to be true of him? And feel free to speak more broadly on the situation as it's unfolding.
Yeah. So I would say that characterization of Mahmoud as somebody that knows Mahmoud personally, as somebody that's friends with Mahmoud, is blatantly false. Mahmoud is he is like a teddy bear almost. He's so
Hmm.
kind and supportive, and he truly cares about everyone. Like even he is locked up in a detention facility right now in Louisiana, and he is using his commissary to the money that he gets to help out other people in the facility. He is teaching the other, he's helping other immigrants with their legal documents. I really think that
How do you know that? Are you in contact? Are you in contact with this lawyer? Because I know that even this lawyer had trouble getting in contact with him until after the hearing that happened, I think yesterday.
so his wife has been able to get in contact with him. So
Okay.
that's all from his wife.
Okay.
And she's doing okay, but it's like, like it's so overwhelming for anybody. And the thing is too is like with Mahmoud is like he was always trying to like work towards a solution. He was always he when interacting with it's also been frustrating too. It's like Columbia hasn't even said his name. Like his name is known globally and his own school can't mention him. And he's met with the trustees, he's met with Katrina Armstrong, and to see a university treat their student like this is heartbreaking. And it's also like it's part of a systemic pattern at Columbia, this dehumanization of Palestinian students. But it's just like with Mahmoud in particular, like he's never somebody that wished badly upon other people or wished badly upon other people or like tried to inflame things. He served as a negotiator. So like a lot of people were scared to talk to the Columbia administration. I've been scared to talk to the Columbia administration because if you talk to them, they put you at risk for disciplinary proceedings. Columbia actually, during the negotiating process, during the encampment, Columbia actually suspended him for a day and then revoked his suspension. But they did that solely as an intimidation tactic, knowing that
Mm,
he was on a visa, knowing that
mm,
that action could have gotten him deported. And
mm,
also too is like Mahmoud is like a lot of students like they're 18, they're 19 years old. They might feel a little uncomfortable going and talking to an administrator. Mahmoud is in his 30s, so it's like he
mm,
has that experience, he has that wisdom to interact with administrators in a way that like an undergrad might not. Another thing too is that Mahmoud, he's just like to know the type of love and care that he gives to other people. It's like you have to be around him. Like he just shows so much love to everyone. He helps out anybody who needs it. Anybody. People would berate him on campus or say nasty things to him on campus, and he was always calm, always measured. And to be clear, even if somebody isn't like calm or measured, even if somebody isn't like
of
as friendly
course.
as Mahmoud is, they still deserve due process. They still shouldn't be like ripped from their home like this. But to do it to Mahmoud, to somebody who so many students look up to, is just seen as egregious. And it's seen as such a violation of trust among the Palestinian students and the fact that trustees, there are trustees at Columbia, like for example, David Greenwald, he's personally interfered in every single disciplinary case when it comes to Palestine. He's responsible for going and putting these frankly false disciplinary sanctions on students. And there have been trustees that reported Mahmoud to ICE. That was reported in Forward magazine, leading Jewish publication. And so to just see members of your university like turn on somebody when they know his character, when they know how he is just, it's so incredibly heartbreaking and it's distressing. And it's also too is like they're not just going to stop with Mahmoud. Like we saw that how we had ICE was it raid two dorms yesterday in attempt to detain two students. We had ICE detain another Palestinian student today. They are using Mahmoud as an example, and it doesn't just stop with him. And I think um, that's why it's so important to be loud and to be vocal about your support for Mahmoud, about your support for Palestinian liberation, just because what happens with him, like it's not going to stop with him. They are going to use this on other people. And I think that's it's it's been really heartwarming to see like the amount of support and the amount of love that he's gotten. It really means a lot. And I think that really attests to the type of person that he is.
Yeah, I
So I
don't
kind
I
of
want
like
to be
rambled there or anything.
no,
It's
no,
just
no,
it's
not
a
at all. I think it's so nice to talk to people to someone who knows him. It helps to take this from the realm of sort of abstraction and personalize it, especially because there is so much of such a significant smear campaign happening. I mean, the implication of Chuck Schumer's statement that, of course, he doesn't directly say Mahmoud is anti-Semitic, but he says, I have been clear on the record that I disapprove of the anti-Semitic protests at Columbia. Nonetheless, I
Mhm.
don't think they, should not be deported. Mahmoud shouldn't have been detained, rather. And so I want to be really clear about that not only has he made repeated public statements condemning anti-Semitism, being this measured, kind of warm, steady presence on campus, welcoming presence on campus. But also, even if that weren't the case, there is still not only a legal basis for what they're doing, nor is the Trump administration claiming there's a legal basis for what they're doing. So Glenn Greenwald has been really, a better Greenwald than the one that you mentioned, has been really consistent on this. So first there was reporting in Bari Weiss's Free Press, ironically enough, as someone who's been such a pro-Zionist and anti-free speech when it comes to Palestine advocate for her entire life since she was herself a student at Columbia, right? They reported the following. A White House official told the Free Press that the basis for targeting Khalil is being used as a blueprint for investigations against other students. Khalil is, quote, a threat to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States, said the official, noting that this calculation was the driving force behind the arrest. Quote, the allegation here is not that he was breaking the law, said the official. Glenn Greenwald opined on this, saying there hasn't been a single quote or act of Khalil's to justify the accusation that he hates Jews, supports Hamas, assaulted anyone, advocates terrorism, et cetera, et cetera. None of these is his real crime. The real crime is protesting Biden's financing / arming of Israel. So even by the government's own reasoning, they're not saying that he participated in any acts, conducted any acts that would have been a justification for withdrawing his green card status. What they're relying on is the idea that the Secretary of Homeland Security, Mark Rubio, can independently in his discretion make the choice to revoke his citizenship status.
Which is incredibly, incredibly dangerous because, A, look at the language that they're using, that threat to the foreign policy interests of the United States. And so it's like, okay, if you oppose what's going on in a country in Latin America, if you oppose how the United States is treating Ukraine, does that mean you'll also face deportation? Does that mean that you'll also be ripped away from your family and your loved ones without proper legal representation, without due process? And it's also too is like, it's also ironic that Marco Rubio is like leading this too, because it's like, I believe it was either his father or his grandfather, but he came to the United States not on a visa.
Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.